The gentle sway of the train and the rhythmic clack of wheels on the track filled the air. I settled into my seat beside Oliver, watching the English countryside blur by through the window. The sky was a steel gray blanket, promising rain, but inside, the carriage was warm and cozy. Oliver was busy reading his book, his arm wrapped around me comfortably. I let my head rest on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling a rare sense of peace. Just then, as I scanned the seats around us, something, or rather someone, caught my eye. A woman, sitting alone by the window, was staring blankly at the landscape beyond. Her face was angled away, but there was something unmistakably familiar in her profile. In the curve of her jawline, the soft fall of her graying hair. A chill ran through me as recognition dawned. My mother. I instinctively turned away, heart pounding, and quickly looked down, gripping Oliver's hand tightly. How could it be her? It had been years since I'd seen her, years since our last encounter, a bitter, painful exchange that had left me feeling utterly alone and unwanted. I must have squeezed Oliver's hand harder than I realized because he looked over, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Hey, everything okay?" he asked softly, his voice pulling me back to the present. "Oh, it's nothing," I replied, forcing a smile. I thought I recognized someone, that's all." Oliver's gaze followed mine, but I quickly leaned forward, blocking his view. "Do you know her?" he asked. "Yes, no," I stammered, unsure of what to say. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The woman who'd once been my whole world, and then, so painfully, my greatest heartbreak, was just a few seats away. "Do you want to talk about it?" Oliver's hand was gentle, reassuring. "Not here," I whispered. "It's complicated." I forced another smile, hoping it looked more natural this time. "Okay," he said softly, accepting my silence. He gently ran his thumb over my knuckles. "I'm here if you need me." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. The memories were pulling me back, vivid and raw. I stole another glance toward her, thinking about how much time had passed. She looked different, older and grayer, yes, but still carrying that same dignified air. I wondered if she ever thought of me, if she had any regrets. It was a foolish question. I knew the answer, or at least I thought I did. She'd been clear that she'd found a new family, one that didn't include me. Oliver's voice broke into my thoughts again. "Are you sure you're okay? You've gone really quiet." I hesitated before answering, keeping my voice low. "It's my mother," I finally admitted. "Oh," he said, eyebrows raised in surprise. You didn't tell me she'd be on the train. Do you want to go say hello?" "Not exactly," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. "We're not close. I haven't spoken to her in years." Oliver paused, his face softening as he took in my discomfort. He leaned in closer. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. But if you do, I'm right here with you." I gave him a grateful look, though a surge of old, conflicted feelings churned inside me. "Thanks, I never thought I'd see her again, you know? I thought that part of my life was over." I glanced at my mother again. I wondered if I could even call her that. I couldn't remember the last time I truly thought of her that way. She had once been the person I loved most in the world, the one I wanted to protect and care for, even as a child. But after my father left, it was as if she left with him in spirit, becoming someone colder, someone I hardly recognized. Oliver reached over, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said softly. "I know," I murmured, blinking back sudden tears. "It's just that seeing her, it's like all those years are crashing down on me. It hurts." He gave my hand another gentle squeeze, his voice filled with compassion. "I'm here for you, Sarah, whatever you need." I closed my eyes, gathering my thoughts. The train ride felt both endless and far too short. Seeing her there, so close yet a lifetime away, was like looking at a ghost. After the shock of seeing my mother on the train, memories from my childhood seemed to flood in, one after another, like unstoppable waves. The familiar countryside and Oliver's comforting presence faded as I drifted back in time, to a place I had tried so hard to forget. My father had left when I was barely 6. I could still remember the night he walked out the door, a packed suitcase in hand, and the way my mother's face looked afterward, stricken, frozen, a mix of shock and anger. After he was gone, she quickly remarried, and Thomas entered our lives. He was nothing like my father. Where my dad had been gentle and playful, Thomas was cold, a tall figure with piercing eyes that never softened when he looked at me. He had a way of making me feel small, as if I were an unwanted guest in my own home. Even though I was just a child, I could sense that I annoyed him, that he barely tolerated me. One memory surfaced, vivid as if it had happened yesterday. I was around 10 years old, trying to set the table before dinner. "That's not where the knife goes," Thomas said sharply, glancing at the way I placed it next to the plate. His tone was dismissive, a hint of irritation underlying every word. "Oh, sorry," I muttered, reaching to fix it, my hands shaking slightly. He let out a sigh, crossing his arms. "Honestly, do you ever listen? You and your mother, always in your own world." I looked down, feeling the sting of his words. I wanted to disappear, to shrink away from his gaze. "Thomas," my mother said from the doorway, her voice strained but low, almost pleading. "She's just a child. Give her a little grace." "A child who doesn't know how to do anything right," he replied, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. "And a mother who spoils her endlessly. No wonder she's turning out this way." The way he said it made my cheeks burn, as if I were some kind of burden, a flaw he'd been forced to live with. My mother fell silent, her eyes dropping to the floor. She always did that when he spoke to her like that, always retreated, leaving me there to bear the weight of his disapproval alone. I returned to the present, feeling my throat tighten at the memory. Oliver's hand rested gently on mine, grabbing me in the here and now. He looked at me, his eyes filled with silent understanding. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked softly, his voice pulling me back. "I don't know where to start," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Well," he said, giving me a gentle nudge, "we have time. Start wherever you want." I took a deep breath. My mother changed a lot after my dad left. She married Thomas quickly, almost as if she was desperate to prove something. But Thomas, he never wanted me around. Oliver frowned, his eyes searching my face. "Why didn't he want you around?" I hesitated, struggling to put it into words. He acted like I was just in the way. He didn't like me being near him, didn't like how I reminded my mother of my father, I guess. And he let me know it every chance he got. He'd say things like, "Your mother doesn't need you," or "Go to your room. Adults are talking." Oliver's hand tightened around mine protectively. That must have been terrible, growing up with that. It was, I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. But the worst part was, my mother went along with it. She just let him treat me that way. I think she was afraid of losing him, of ending up alone again. He shook his head, disbelief flickering across his face. "Sarah, I can't imagine what that must have felt like." I looked down, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. I think, eventually, I just got used to it. It was like I stopped expecting anything from her. I remembered one night in particular, a night I finally found the courage to stand up to Thomas. I was 16, and he'd been berating me for leaving my books on the kitchen table. "This is my home too, you know," I'd said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "Not as long as I'm here. I don't want to see you or hear you unless it's absolutely necessary. You're nothing but a nuisance." My mother, who had been standing in the hallway, rushed in at that moment. "Thomas, please, let's just calm down," she pleaded, her eyes darting between us. He turned to her, his expression hardening. "Make sure I never have to deal with her again, understand?" She nodded, looking down at her hands, and for a moment, I thought she might say something in my defense. But instead, she turned to me, her eyes cold. "You should be more respectful, Sarah. Thomas works hard to provide for us, and the least you could do is show some gratitude." I looked at her, feeling my chest tighten with a mix of disbelief and betrayal. "So you're just going to let him talk to me like that?" She didn't answer. Instead, she gave me a withering look, her voice laced with disdain. "Do you have any idea how much you complicate things? Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if you hadn't been born." Her words hung in the air, each one landing like a blow. I stared at her, the person I had once loved more than anyone, feeling my heart shatter. Back in the train, I swallowed, forcing myself to breathe through the ache in my chest. "I thought maybe she'd try to protect me, you know?" I said softly, looking up at Oliver. But instead, she just sided with him, every time. He reached out, brushing a tear from my cheek. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. No one deserves that, least of all a kid." I nodded, trying to keep my composure. I guess, in a way, I knew that night that I was on my own. Oliver's hand tightened around mine, his voice steady. "You're not on your own anymore." I managed a small smile, feeling the warmth of his words sink in, reassuring and comforting. I knew he meant it, knew he would stand by me, no matter what. And yet, the shadows of my past lingered, reminding me of the wounds that had shaped me, wounds I wasn't sure would ever truly heal. The day I decided to leave felt surreal, like I was watching someone else make the choice. In my mind, it had been building up for years, but I had never imagined the moment would actually come. It was one thing to dream about escape, another to live it. Yet, the thought of staying one more day under the same roof as Thomas and my mother felt suffocating. I needed to go, even if it meant facing the unknown alone. I stood in my bedroom, packing the last of my things into an old suitcase. My hands shook as I folded my clothes, trying to ignore the heavy silence of the house around me. It was late in the evening, and the house felt emptier than it had ever been. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant ticking of the clock. Everything felt magnified in the stillness. My mother had gone to bed hours ago, pretending not to notice my movements. Thomas had been out, spending the evening at a bar with his friends. I knew it was my last chance to leave without an argument, without any interference. I had to leave before one of them decided to confront me. I was almost done packing when I heard footsteps outside my door. Sarah. My mother's voice came from the hallway, soft but unmistakable. My heart skipped, a jolt of panic rushing through me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. What was there to say? The door creaked open, and I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She was dressed in an old robe, her hair loosely pulled back. It was strange how little we spoke now. The years of tension had reduced our conversations to mere formalities, like two strangers who share a home but nothing else. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp, like a blade hidden in the softest of words. I didn't look at her directly, my gaze fixed on the suitcase. "I'm leaving." Her eyes flickered, just for a second. It wasn't shock or anger, but something else, something colder, more resigned. "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet," I replied, my voice tight with the lie. I had no plan. I didn't need one. I just needed to get out. "You can't be serious." She stepped into the room, her eyes scanning my belongings as if they were foreign to her. "You can't just leave. Not like this." "I'm 18, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "I don't need permission." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. Instead, she looked down at the floor, as if trying to avoid meeting my eyes. "You're making a mistake, you know. You'll regret this. It's not as easy as you think." "I know it's not," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I can't stay here anymore, not with him." I couldn't stop the bitterness from creeping into my tone as I said the last part. I didn't want to talk about Thomas, didn't want to rehash the years of resentment. "Don't talk about him like that." Her voice rose, just enough to sting. "You think you're the only one who has had to make sacrifices." I clenched my fists, biting my lip to keep from yelling. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't see the way you've given up everything for him? For his approval?" Her face hardened at the accusation, but she didn't defend herself. She had never defended herself to me. Not when I was younger, not when I needed her most. "I don't need this, Sarah. I've done my best." "Your best?" I shook my head, the anger boiling beneath my calm exterior. "You think your best was ignoring me, pushing me aside for him? I'm your daughter, Mom, but you made it clear, didn't you? I'm not important." She took a sharp breath, her hands trembling at her sides. "This is your choice then? Fine, leave, but don't come back crying when you realize the world isn't so kind." I bit back the tears that threatened to spill. I had heard these words before, but they never lost their sting. The weight of her indifference crushed me, and I felt the ache of years of longing that would never be fulfilled. "I won't come back," I said, my voice steady now, a finality in my words. Without waiting for her reply, I grabbed the suitcase and walked past her, heading toward the front door. I heard her call after me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind me, and I was alone. I stood on the porch for a moment, the cool night air brushing against my skin. I could still hear the hum of life inside the house, the flicker of the television, the clink of glasses from Thomas's friends, but it felt like a lifetime away. For the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped. It was as though a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but that didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was that I was free. Free from the cold indifference, the judgment, the suffocating presence of a stepfather who had never accepted me, and a mother who had turned a blind eye. I had no plan, no safety net, just a suitcase full of clothes and a heart full of fury. A few days later, I stood in front of a small, run-down apartment complex, keys in hand. I had found a cheap room to rent, barely big enough for a bed and a desk, but it was mine. The thought of it filled me with a strange mixture of excitement and fear. I'd had told my mother I was going to stay with a friend for a while, but I knew she didn't believe me. She didn't care enough to ask the right questions. Inside the room, I set my suitcase on the floor and stood for a moment, taking it all in. The cracked walls, the peeling paint, the faint smell of old carpet. It was nothing like home, but it felt more like home than the house I had just left. I sat on the bed, staring at the empty room, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. "Are you okay?" Oliver's voice broke through the quiet of my thoughts, pulling me back into the present. I glanced up at him, seeing the concern etched on his face. His hand reached for mine, and I squeezed it tightly. I'm fine, I whispered, even though I wasn't. I wasn't sure if I would ever be fine, but in this moment I was something I hadn't been in a long time, free. And that, at least, was a start. Returning to the place I once called home feels like stepping into a different world, one where I'm a stranger to everyone, including myself. The familiar door is now a barrier, a symbol of everything that went wrong. I haven't been back since I moved out, and the thought of walking through it fills me with unease. I stand outside for a moment, looking at the peeling paint on the front door, the cracked window, the once vibrant flower boxes that are now withered. It's as if the house itself has been waiting for this awkward reunion just as much as I have. A quiet part of me wonders why I'm even here. Maybe it's for the warmth I remember, or perhaps for some closure, even if I'm not sure what that looks like. I take a deep breath and push the door open. The familiar creak of the hinges echoes through the silence. The smell of old furniture and faint cooking greets me, but there's an undercurrent of something cold, something different. Sarah, my mother calls from the kitchen, her voice flat, almost detached. Is that you? I step inside, closing the door softly behind me. She doesn't even get up from the kitchen table to greet me. The lack of warmth stings, but I've learned not to expect much from her. Yeah, it's me, I reply, trying to sound casual. I set my bag down by the door and glance around, feeling like I'm intruding. You didn't give me any notice that you were coming. Why didn't you call first? My mother's voice has a sharp edge, as if I've broken some unwritten rule by simply showing up. I just wanted to grab a few things, I explain, avoiding her gaze. My eyes roam over the room, scanning for anything that might hint at warmth, but all I see are the same cold walls, the same cluttered counters. She doesn't reply right away, just sips her tea, eyeing me carefully from across the room. The silence stretches between us like a thick fog, and I feel the weight of it pressing down on me. Where's Thomas? I ask, trying to ease the tension, though I already know the answer. I haven't seen him in months. Out, he'll be back later, probably. My mother's response is terse, as if even mentioning his name takes effort. The coldness between them is almost palpable. I can't help but think about how different this place feels. It's as if everything is unchanged and yet entirely foreign. I want to ask about Oleg, about how things are going with him staying here, but the words get stuck in my throat. I know she won't give me a straight answer, and I don't want to get into another one of our tired, painful conversations. So, I start, trying to break the silence. I was thinking of taking my winter things. The weather's getting colder. My mother looks at me for a moment, as if assessing whether I'm truly staying or just passing through. Fine, take what you need and go, she says bluntly. You can't just drop by whenever you feel like it. Her words hit harder than I expect. It's not just the sharpness of her tone, but the finality in it. The message is clear. I don't belong here anymore. Okay, I say quietly, already feeling the sting of her rejection. I head to my old room, the one I had once thought of as mine. I haven't been in here since I moved out, but it feels strangely familiar, yet just as much like a stranger's space. I open the closet door, hesitating. There's my old coat, the one I wore when I left for the last time. I take it down and run my fingers over the fabric, memories flooding back, but they're not the kind of memories I want to keep. The days spent in this room feel like they belong to someone else, a different version of me. When I step back into the kitchen, my mother is still sitting at the table, not looking up. The quiet is suffocating, like a wall between us. She doesn't ask me how I'm doing, doesn't show any interest in my life outside these walls. I feel like I'm invisible, a shadow of the daughter she once had. As I gather my things, ready to leave, she finally speaks up. You know, Oleg's been a big help around here, she says, her voice laced with something I can't quite place. Pride? Resentment? He's been staying with us for a while now. You'll like him. He's really trying to get his life together. I nod, but my heart sinks. I've never felt this far from my mother before. It's as if, over time, I've faded from her life, replaced by someone else. Well, I guess I'll get going, I say, my voice barely above a whisper. Thanks for the clothes. Don't be a stranger, she says, but there's no warmth in her words. It's more of a command than an invitation. I leave without another word, the door closing softly behind me. As I walk down the path away from the house, the cool air feels refreshing, but also cutting. My steps quicken as I realize just how much I've changed, and how much I've been changed by the world I've left behind. The day I moved out felt like a victory, like I had finally won something that had been out of my reach for far too long. But now, with the door of my childhood home closing softly behind me, I realize it wasn't a victory at all. It was just another way of leaving a chapter unfinished. Another page of my life that I couldn't turn fast enough. I stand at the foot of the stairs, staring up at the narrow street. The trees lining the road are almost bare now, their branches stretching out like skeletal arms against the gray sky. The air smells faintly of the approaching winter, cold, sharp, and unforgiving. But I don't care. I'm beyond caring about that house now, about the people still inside it. I'm not sure what I expected to feel. Perhaps I wanted to feel liberated, like I had finally broken free from everything that had bound me. Instead, there's a dull ache in my chest, a sense of loss that I can't quite explain. I glanced down at the bag of clothes in my hands, the coat my mother had insisted I take. A gift, or more like a command to leave quickly, take what I needed, and get out of her way. But as I stare at it, I can't help but wonder if it's just another piece of the puzzle of a mother who never really wanted to be one. I'm walking down the street when my phone buzzes. I pull it out, hoping for something, anything that might make me feel connected to the life I've built for myself. But it's just a text from Oliver. How'd it go? I hesitate before typing a response. There's nothing to say. Not really. How could I explain the coldness that still lingers in my bones after stepping back into that house? How could I tell him that no matter how far I've come, part of me is still waiting for someone to look at me and say, "You matter"?